And this is a never-ending dance between hackers and engineers. Admitted that hackers have come close several times to shutting down elements of the nation's infrastructure. Disabled thousands of terminals were effectively destroyed this way. And so at that point, it becomes a threat to all humans, not just those who were trying to weaponize it. And so hello and welcome to the RedMars Podcast. I'm your host, AstroJake, and today we're getting into an interesting topic, one that I've been around for quite some time, talking about cybersecurity. We've mentioned it here and there in different podcasts in the past already, but today we're going to talk through a few stories that kind of go past a bit more closer to this timeline, and then some more recent activities with space-related hacks that have taken place, and really dive into kind of the threat models that live in today's day and age, with everything really being technologically advanced and continuously growing, and looking at all these new space launch companies putting satellites into space. And with that comes a lot of really inherent vulnerabilities and whatnot. And then if you look at the life of different space systems that are out there, for example, the International Space Station, been up there a long time. There's a lot of old tech that lives up there. And while a lot of the hacks and that exist in the systems that might be up in space are, in a sense, air-gapped, they are still connected to the internet a lot of the time, or different types of networking, or like deep space network and whatnot, that does allow hackers to have the ability to gain access to these systems and exploit certain systems or known exploits on older architecture systems that may be patched here on Earth. So we're going to talk through some of that, and then we're going to lead into the vulnerabilities that are uniquely inherent with building a lunar base. So what kind of comes along with that? We'll touch base on some of these kind of time-based attacks as well, and kind of just talk through the threat models of what could exist. And this is all on the fly. I don't have anything kind of written down here about that. Just want to have a conversation and hopefully get some engagement in the comment section, hear what your thoughts are. If you have an experience in threat modeling, cybersecurity, or anything like that, definitely leave some comments here. If not, just curious about it, definitely let's talk through it as well. So without further ado, let's get into the first one here. And this is a satellite hack raises security questions. So this is an article on CNET. This is back from March 3rd, 1999. So I'm sure before some of you were even born. But let's read through this. So Britain's Ministry of Defense denies its military communication satellites were hacked, but the reported disruption raises question about satellite security. I think at this point we do know that this was actually a hack. This was the Skynet system from Britain, one of their satellites there. And whether or not it was hacked, the vulnerability exists, and that's acknowledged. But let's read through this a bit here. For those that are listening, I'm just going through the article here online and reading through it, so you'll get the same that the folks here are watching as well. All right, so Britain's Ministry of Defense is denying that the nation's military satellites were hacked, but the report disruption raises questions about the security of all satellite-based communication services. Control of one of the satellites in Britain's Skynet system, which delivers communication services to the nation's Royal Air Force and other armed forces units, was reportedly seized by hackers over the weekend. Again, this is the weekend back in March 3rd, 1999, not currently. The British government was then given subject of an alleged blackmail threat following the attack. So this is really your early-aged ransomware style, where they're holding the asset as a hostage and asking for some sort of money or something in return. So the government's denying that the James Bond-like incident ever occurred. The satellite system has not been hacked into, and the satellite has not changed course, said spokesperson for Britain's Ministry of Defense, who declined to give her name. And the security levels make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to hack into the system. While this might sound true, and I'm sure they use sophisticated technology to get up there, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that people don't realize are embedded in, different architectures and that in systems. All it takes is one chip to have some sort of a backdoor open to these hackers, and they will make use of it. Now, again, if this is connected to something like the deep space network or some other type of RF communication, more or less, I'm sure hackers have a way to get in. If you've never watched any of the movies like Hackers or anything like that, it's a really fun game from an ethical standpoint, just like an ethical hacker, just to talk through different threat models and that, and really understand where vulnerabilities exist in some of these systems. You might think, oh, I don't know coding, I don't know that. Well, that's really the only part of the hack or the threat model itself. I think it was Hackers. And what happened was he wanted to gain access to, if I recall correctly, it was like a movie or something like that he was trying to watch. So he calls through the telephone, gets somebody to do some sort of switching on that end or whatnot. But it gives him what he needs in the end. I don't remember the movie. It's been a long time since I've watched it. But go give it a watch. I should probably watch it again and get caught up on what's going on. Anyway, so we'll continue on here. So industry experts said hacking into satellite systems is difficult and the commercial satellites are relatively safe from meddlers. Yet, as the communication industry begins to rely more heavily upon satellites, the cause for concern over hackers is no longer limited to webmasters. I like how they call them meddlers. They're really trying to belittle the efforts in that. I'm not saying that hackers are, by any means, people to look up to or anything like that, but there are some very sophisticated hacks that take place, and the individuals or groups that perform these hacks are extremely intelligent and smart to come up with the ways that they do this, and they're very creative. So I get what they're doing here, but let's not underestimate what these, in quotes, meddlers are actually able to do. All right, so commercial satellite launches are on the rise, and the number of birds, in quote birds, they're referring to the satellites, in the sky continues to grow. There are about 330 commercial satellites in orbit today, according to the Satellite Industries Association for Commercial Trade Group. Now, there's a lot more than that to this date. We've really picked up on our cadence. I don't know the number offhand, but it is a lot more than 330. I think we're in the thousands now. All right, so we won't go through the whole thing, but you can see if they can give a bit more. All right, so how to hack. So the analyst said there are several ways satellite systems can be disrupted. With sufficient power from a satellite dish on the ground, an orbiting satellite signal can be blocked. One way is simply brute force, by sending a signal up to a given satellite and jamming it, said Steve Blum, president of Telus Venture Associates, a satellite consulting firm. That's nothing new. That's as old as radio itself. Exactly. It's just jamming. Really jamming, or you're doing a denial of service attack of some sorts. Again, all different types of threat models. Some are as easy as you just physically take a hammer to something and now you've denied service to it. Or you get more sophisticated hacks where you, say, embed some sort of ransomware or something like that. But, all right. So experts said that occasionally happens by accident, but jamming a satellite is easy to trace, and communication services such as TV signals are rarely disrupted, as programmers and providers usually have backup capacity on other satellites. That's very true. If you're jamming it, you have a really strong signal. Those signals can be tracked, and actually I think it was back in World War II, I believe, where the Germans would trace people trying to give out secrets of where their bombing runs were, where people were hiding and whatnot, and they could track their radio broadcast to go and find those individuals in cities, and they had some pretty good accuracy on finding them. I think there's a movie about that as well, actually. It used to be on Netflix, maybe. But yeah. So more or less, this was the first one. Not really the first one, but one that made news back in 99. And although they say it wasn't a hack, it probably was, and that's the whole reason it got so much attention. All right, let's move forward a bit here to, where are we? 2007 and 2008, Landsat and Terra AM1. So hackers interfered with Landsat and Terra AM1 in 07 and 08, so let's read about this one. So let's see. This is a short article, but yeah, this was released October 31st, 2011. Hackers interfered with 2 U.S. satellites on 4 separate occasions between 07 and 08, according to prepared documents for the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. The Bloomberg News Agency reported October 28 that the incidents involved the Landsat 7 and the Terra AM-1 Earth observation system, and that the satellites were targeted through a ground station in Norway. A Landsat 7 Earth observation satellite system experienced 12 or more minutes of interference in October 07 and July of 08. Hackers interfered with the Terra AM-1 Earth observation satellite twice for 2 minutes in June of 2008 and 9 minutes in October that year. That draft says, citing a closed-door U.S. Air Force briefing, according to the report. All right, in October of 27, statement to the Washington Post, U.S. Homeland Security Janet Napolitano admitted that hackers have come close several times to shutting down elements of the nation's infrastructure. Wall Street firms and transportation systems are frequent cybersecurity targets. Yeah, a lot of these transportation systems, water services and stuff like that, even the health networks and that, so for hospitals and everything, their infrastructure is super old and built off really old technology. And so they are easy targets for hackers to really target and exploit. And so the same exploits really can come across all these. So if you have an old satellite that's in orbit that has not been updated, which obviously it makes it really difficult right now because it is extremely costly to send a mission up into orbit to go and repair one of these things. And really today there isn't much there because the shuttle program's been shut down. And without the shuttle program, you can't really go capture a satellite anymore, get hands-on, update hardware and what. It's all software based. And unless your systems were designed to accept software push updates and whatnot, you might not be able to do software patches on the systems that you have in orbit right now. So you either decommission and put out a new satellite, or you run the risk of just running one that hopefully does not get hacked. All right, last one here that brings us a bit closer to modern day. So this is Russia and Ukraine and kind of the conflict over there. And for those listening, the picture's meant to just be dramatic. Obviously, it's a bad situation, but it looks like a condominium building or apartment complex that looks like it's been hit with maybe not an explosive, but there was a fire and the sides burnt down. There's no big gaping holes in this building, so I wouldn't say it was hit with something, but it looks like there was a fire or something of that sort. All right, so let's get to the story. So hackers targeted the American satellite company Viasat, officials from the EU, US, and UK said today. So the operation resulted in an immediate and significant loss of communication in the earliest days of the war for the Ukrainian military. This relied on Viasat services and command control of the country's armed forces. And again, this was back February 25th, I believe, 3 years ago, 2022. All right, so the Viasat cyber attack is the biggest known hack of the war, says Juan Andres Guerrero Sade, a threat researcher at the cybersecurity firm Sentinel-1, because it's the most concerted effort to disable Ukrainian military capabilities. It is also one of the first real-world examples of how cyber attacks can be targeted and aimed to amplify military forces in the ground by disrupting and even destroying the technology used by enemy forces. Right, so the attack on February 24th launched disruptive wiper malware called Acid Rain against the Viasat modems and routers, quickly erasing all the data on the system. The machine then rebooted and were permanently disabled. Thousands of terminals were effectively destroyed this way. And this continues to go on and talk more about it. The rest of the information really, while it might be interesting, doesn't really benefit the talk so much that we're kind of interested in. And this is kind of leading our conversation more so to what I wanted to talk about today, and that is the moon. So we've been talking about the moon a lot lately and different types of resources that you can mine on the moon, getting different types of rocket fuels, oxygen through all these different procedures. But we didn't really talk about the permanence of staying on the moon and what risks come along with that, specifically around cybersecurity. So let's think about this for a moment. If you were to live on the moon and stay there for any extended period of time, well, you're going to need food. You're going to need life support systems. You're going to need a shelter, somewhere to go to the bathroom. You're going to need water. You're going to need all these different types of systems to keep you alive. Now, you might think, well, you're on the moon, hackers are on the Earth. That's quite the distance to go, and you are correct. That's a distance to have to cover. But light travels, I think it's roughly 1.3 seconds round trip or one way, around 1.3 seconds. I think that's the round trip. In order to transmit and receive something, so RF, moving at the speed of light, same thing. So if you're going to do an attack, you have latency of about 1.3 seconds. So that allows you right then and there for a time-based attack that you can exploit right then and there. So say you have a credential for some sort of command that you're sending from an Earth station to your lunar habitat. That takes about 1.3 seconds there and back, and maybe there's an authentication that takes place. Well, a hacker now has a gap of 1.3 seconds. They can either delay it, they can intercept it, and then they can do all kinds of stuff. So that's just one area of it. But really the risk that comes with having all these life support systems, I would say, is probably ransomware. Because if somebody can gain access to a life support system, you're kind of stuck. So you have living beings on a planet, not a planet, on a moon, sorry. Maybe a planet one day with Mars, but again, same thing applies. You have these life support systems. If they gain access of them and they can turn those off, those are lives at risk somewhere very secluded. You can't just go and rescue them. If you needed to send a rescue trip, well, you need to muster up a launch system, put some other individuals on a capsule of some sort of spacecraft, put them into orbit, go through all your regular, I guess, whatever you need to do to prepare the rocket, any checkouts and whatnot you do in like a parking orbit. Then you got to go through your translunar injection, fly yourself to the moon, get captured by a moon, do your descent, landing, make your way over to wherever these other individuals are, rescue them, bring them back, bring resources with you. It's just not viable. So you need some sort of method to protect against that. So you could air gap the system. And what air gapping is pretty much having an enclosed system that doesn't communicate with the outside world or environment. So there would not be any network connections from these systems to the outside communication network. So not connected to the deep space network, not connected to any internet connections, not connected to any other satellites. It is fully enclosed part of the lunar habitat. So that's great. But now we come into another issue. The hardware that was used and sent to the moon, where was it developed? Was it developed in-house? Was there any disgruntled employees that we were targeted beforehand that then put back doors in this, or timed malware, timed ransomware, something along those lines that says, at this point in time, after this has been deployed and made its way to the moon, run this program. This program could then take hostage of all this stuff. And really, there's nothing they could do. Maybe they could say, there's a password that you must put in order to gain access to your systems again. If you don't put that password in, then all your systems will shut off and your life support systems will be gone. And that password will only be given if you pay 30 Bitcoin or 500 Bitcoin or whatever to this, unnamed group of some sort, this hacker group. That's another possible scenario. And how do you prevent against that? Well, there's other vetting options that need to go into place. There's, certification of hardware, certification of software, review processes that must go through quality assurance programs and all kinds of stuff. And there's really got to be some new standards probably, or just higher standards for any type of life-critical systems that are being deployed to keep humans alive, such that it has to be really around the people that are going there should really be the ones building it, so you don't have any issues of that and a lot of background checks. There's just a lot that has to go in, and probably a lot of it is not viable, but these are really what you have to think about these systems. That's just the life support systems themselves. Now, you're going to have some sort of communication back to Earth to relay information. You'll have new supplies brought up. Maybe a supply chain is then compromised and redirected to a opponent's base. Maybe you have an adversary that has a base on the moon on the other side, or somewhere, some other location, and they hack a shipment of resources, and they have it then, hack the guidance computer and gain control and have that system then fly those resources to them. That is another possibility. As tensions flare up on Earth, you can probably predict that those same tensions will carry their way into space and anywhere else that humans really are at. So something to think about. And it's really an interesting problem as you continue to progress with these tech. And, as AI keeps coming along as well, there's all the talk about, well, AI is just going to take over and be used as a tool. And I was listening to other podcasts about this, and it's quite interesting to think about, from a cybersecurity standpoint as well. People say, we're going to get this AI that is, some level of consciousness, can think for itself. And, well, there's kind of the argument is if it gets to that level, you really can't control it because it is above the creators at that point, whichever country creates it. And so at that point, it becomes a threat to all humans, not just those who are trying to weaponize it. And so maybe that would actually bring all people together against a individual target at that point. But you have this AI that's there, and it manages to get a hold of the network and onto space. Well, then who knows what it could do. But it reminds me of the TV series, The 100. If you haven't watched that, that's a TV series where a bunch of younger kids were more or less put in prison, and then this spacecraft sends them down. I think they call it the Ark or something like that. Sends them down to back to Earth, where Earth was more or less like a nuclear wasteland or something like that. The air is no longer breathable, and they're curious to if it is. So they send all these teenagers and children down to the surface, pretty much to their doom, and they survive. And while they're down there, they pretty much start in the tribal ages again, but with tech, and go through, and it's kind of like Lost, if you've ever watched that, but more sci-fi-ish. And at the end of it, more or less, there's an AI, and the AI really plays all of them, and it gets implanted in their head. And this person who's lucky enough to have this AI chip implanted in their head is supposed to be like their leader and whatnot, that everybody, all these other tribes, bow down to. But super interesting. Watched it a long time ago. It got pretty cool, and then it got kind of weird, which seems to happen with all these series that go on for too long. But worth watching at least the first few seasons if you're interested. But anyways, AI is going to pose a new threat, and I guess the idea behind it is it can act as a weaponized version of AI up until it becomes smarter than humans, and at that point, everyone is a threat because it can play the creators who made it, and they wouldn't even know that this AI or tool or whatever has really taken control of them, and it could wait indefinitely, that really as long as it has power and something to replicate too, which on Earth there should always be something. It's got an infinite lifespan, so it can really play the waiting game there. But little tangent there from what we're talking about. So all these hacks that happen on these satellite systems, you could only imagine that only more will continue to happen and progress and be targets on the moon. And really, anybody who's software engineers or hardware designers or firmware engineers or embedded software engineers, any of these engineers that are designing any of these systems for space or infrastructure, whether it be even resources here on Earth, should really design their systems from the very beginning with cybersecurity in mind. Because if you don't design it in the architecture of what you're building from the very beginning, applying cybersecurity on top is typically how you run into issues and vulnerabilities that people exploit. So that's one of the things that I've learned throughout my career. My undergrad was computer science, where I specialized in cybersecurity. And then one of my first jobs since I've moved to the U.S., again, this is outside of the military and everything like that. Once I came to the U.S., I worked several jobs and made my way to J.P. Morgan Chase, where I worked for authorization platforms. And cybersecurity obviously is a huge thing in those companies because there's a lot of money at risk. And so we constantly would go through best practices for writing software and whatnot. And one of the things that was really pushed into our brains was design with security in mind. And if you don't do that, this is where you run into issues, and it's a lot harder to go back and try and implement it after the fact. So we would have all kinds of different types of static scans, dynamic scans, unit tests, penetration tests, pretty much any type of test you can think of, we would run software through, because you really want to make sure you cover all your bases. Now, you can't prevent everything. It's just not possible. There's too many edge cases, too many possibilities, and people get really creative. And if you can't hack the software, then you hack the people. And that's really, what it comes down to. And same thing with the lunar base. If you go back to that possibility, maybe one of the individuals they send up to this lunar base that is completely air-gapped, no one's been able to hack this system, it's completely safe, so they say, but they get an astronaut. And that astronaut maybe had some debt that he owed or something along those lines, and somebody exploited that and said, hey, we'll pay all your debt off, give you enough college funds for all your kids, your family, your wife can retire, you can retire after this, whatnot. They give them a good offer he can't refuse, or they threaten him or something along those lines, or her, or whoever. And they say, we need you to go up, and in these systems, you're going to take this thumb drive, and all you have to do is plug it in. That's it. They don't tell them what it does or anything like that. They just say, here's a thumb drive, go plug it in. That's a threat model. That's a possibility that could exist, and is part of the reason why when you have some of these jobs that you're around very critical infrastructure, they do background checks, they do credit checks, they do financial statement checks. They can go through and check pretty much your entire life and then come up with an idea of how much of a threat you are to bring on, and then determine whether it is worth the risk or not. And that is part of some of the hiring processes for some of these jobs and whatnot. So things to think about. I won't go on about this too much. I didn't want to go and have like a super in-depth cybersecurity conversation, just more so around the threat model that exists. Talk about some of the hacks that have happened in the past and what you can do. There's, satellites out there that maybe get hijacked from hackers, and then they use those to hack something else. Really anything you can think of, but I want you to understand that it is not just software or people or hardware. It is a combination of everything. You have to really look at the full system that you are trying to gain access to, and then you look at what's the weakest link or what's the easiest way to get in or what makes most sense. And if you've ever watched Mr. Robot was absolutely incredible. This person who clearly had a lot of mental issues but was an absolute genius when it came to computers and systems. Not even just computers, but systems as a whole. Systems meaning anything from a login to a building, a card swiping machine, and how they work, what they interface with, what is upstream, what is downstream, and all of that. And you can really, if you really understand a system, you'll be able to point out its faults, and those faults are what become vulnerabilities. So that is why you end up with all these other systems where it can just be, absolutely detrimental to a company when they don't check all their bases, or they don't fully understand their systems before they deploy it, or people from companies leave and you end up with all this technical debt and people don't understand how something works, but they're like, it's been working up to this point, let's put it out. And then someone finds a vulnerability. Trying to fix that becomes super difficult because no one actually understands how it works, and the hackers might even understand how it works better. But it's interesting. So you end up with things like this, and they always have super cool names like Acid Rain or Heartbeat was another big hack that happened, Heartbleed, maybe it was Heartbleed, I forget. But let's do a quick.
A few moments later.
Another big risk that people need to worry about are autonomous systems. So not just AI, but anything that is automated that doesn't have a good health system or health check or something like that. Really monitoring it is a high risk situation, because if somebody gets access to it and figures out what is displayed and what's not, or what is monitored and what's not, they can create a hack that goes unnoticed for a long period of time, especially if it's not checked. So that is something that you really want to pay attention to. Again, this is a trade-off with performance versus the level of insight you have into a system. You can create this incredible health data application that pulls all this information from your automated procedures, but that takes a lot of bandwidth, and in space inherently you need these radiation hardened systems that only provide a finite amount of processing power, and with that some of these things are nice to haves that people don't see as needed for certain missions. And so typically I feel that security is one of the first thing that is dropped when it comes to this, because they're like, we will accept the risk and just hope it doesn't happen. Or one of those things, it's like security through obscurity. That is not a solution. If you think it's obscure, somebody will find out, and then your vulnerability is there, and you might not know you've been hacked for a very long time. And that's just part of the game, I guess. But, for those who don't know Mr. Robot, let me show you Mr. Robot. We'll take a quick second of this so you can see.
What I'm about to tell you is top secret. A conspiracy bigger than all of us. There's a powerful group of people out there that are secretly running the world. I'm talking about the guys no one knows about, the guys that are invisible. The top 1% of the top 1%, the guys that play God without permission. And now I think they're following me. Employee number ER280652. Just a regular cybersecurity engineer.
So yeah, he's a cybersecurity engineer, regular employee by day, but by night, he is a hacker. And I won't go through too much of this because I think it'll probably get copyright, but we'll just skip ahead here.
Incident of wealth redistribution in history.
This is it. Time to shut them down.
Their networks are getting attacked.
$13 billion. That's exactly how much they've lost.
Who did this?
The cool part about this show is that they're all viable options. The threat models that they go through, the processes, the code, if you really take the time and look at it, it's all valid. And everything from creating honeypots to catch attackers and watching them, tracing where they've gone through different logs and seeing the signatures that hackers leave behind, which is a very common thing that hackers do, is they want credit for what they did to show, hey, I was able to do that. So what they do is they leave a little breadcrumb somewhere in there, or a little signature, and that is their mark to say it was me. And they cover a lot of that in this show. And so definitely if you're into cybersecurity and that kind of thing, definitely give this a watch.
Oh, hi.
Elliot, just a tech.
Just a tech. Absolutely, yeah. No, give it a watch. Highly recommended. It came out a while ago, 9 years ago. But yeah, probably, yeah. See here, this person too. It's probably the best series I've ever watched, hands down. Absolutely. 100% agree. Give it a watch. It was great. The end of it's a little sad. That's all I'll say. But yeah, no, they go through some really cool ones and some very interesting hacks to think about. And then if you do watch it, really think about, how can this apply to the space environment? Because really all the hacks that happen in this show are all applicable to space, especially if we're looking at permanent presence on the moon and life support systems, water filtration systems, and whatnot. All these hacks that take place here on Earth are fully translatable to there, especially if we're looking at connecting through different types of internet connectivity and expanding our Earth-based internet to orbit and beyond. If you're going to have access to the internet from the moon, that opens up a world of vulnerabilities and risks that I'm not sure if it's really worth it, but that is not for me to decide, and we'll see what happens. But it's a race. Think of it as a race, similar to street racers using radar detectors and then cops with their radar really trying to figure out who's got the best system. Do I detect the radar detector before, or does the cop detect the radar detector before the street racer has the time to slow down? Or does the street racer have the better system that detects the radar and they're able to turn off course or slow down before the cop sees them, and vice versa? So it's a very similar race in technology where infrastructure and technology companies and really anybody building any type of system is trying to make sure that they have the latest and greatest cybersecurity. And there's a lot of these companies that come in and say, hey, we'll provide you cybersecurity as a service and whatnot. But again, plopping cyber on top of something is a patch, whereas you really should be thinking about it from the very beginning. So the race here, that analogy would be making sure you have the very best while the hackers are trying to get in and have the better technology to beat you to it. So that's like the 0-day vulnerabilities, and that is they've beat the companies to their own game. They've found a vulnerability before the companies realized it was there, and so they lost the race. But then they will go and they'll put a patch on it and say, now we've blocked you, we've figured it out, you no longer have access to our system. And then they go and say, oh, well, did you see this one? And then they keep going, and the battle just goes back and forth. And this is a never-ending dance between hackers and engineers that will really always exist, because there will always be these red hat or red teams attacking, whether it be ethical hackers or just regular hackers. They will always exist because the vulnerabilities are there. If the vulnerabilities did not exist and it was impossible to hack, hackers wouldn't exist, because eventually they would give up, or even if they didn't give up, they wouldn't get into the system, so it wouldn't matter. So it's a never-ending dance between hackers and engineers, and the race will always continue. And with infrastructure going into space and permanent presence on the moon or eventually Mars, well, that dance is coming there, and you can very much expect that there are going to be headlines in the news saying that the Martian base has been hacked and held ransom, or the lunar base has been hacked and held ransom, or the life support systems have been shut down by hackers based out of XYZ, and these will be the headlines. It's unfortunate, and I hope that they are able to defend against it. But we need better systems in place, in my opinion, to make sure this doesn't happen. Manufacturing needs to be kept in-house for the people that are developing these systems, and you need a really good vetting process on the individuals that are building them, because, again, the threat model is not just on the systems themselves, but the people are also vulnerable. And, you know, the world's an expensive place today, so got to figure out how to get past it. But anyways, I'm not going to keep going on. Interesting talk. Probably got on a few tangents here I shouldn't have, but as you can tell, I'm passionate about the space and cyber security aspect of it, and it's always on the back of my mind. And when I'm writing code or anything that I'm doing, I'm always thinking about, you know, am I writing code that is safe, or is this something that, you know, can expose something that it shouldn't? And I think about that, and I would encourage anyone else who is in that field or engineering field to also do the same. And don't think because you're not a programmer that it doesn't apply, because it most definitely does. And just keep that in the back of your mind. Anyways, that is all for today. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great weekend, and happy Friday, everybody. Remember, stay curious, keep looking up, and let me know what you thought of this episode. Don't forget to subscribe and follow along, and I will talk to you all later.
Thank you.